Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Kovalak, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. Most folks think that means I spend my days giving directions to tourists and telling kids not to feed the bears. But here in Katmai National Park, Alaska, 200 miles from anything that looks like civilization, my job is different. I patrol the coast, I watch for poachers, and I protect the seals and whales that call these frozen waters home. I'm 44 now, old enough to know better than to believe in ghost stories. My grandmother used to tell me tales about things that lived under the ice creatures she called kalupalik, water demons that looked like people but moved like seals. I always figured they were just stories to keep Inuit kids from wandering too close to the ice holes. I stopped believing in a lot of things after my wife died 3 years ago. Cancer took her slow, and no amount of praying or wishing changed that. These days, I believe in what I can see, touch, and prove. I believe in doing my job and keeping the wildlife safe from the kind of people who think dynamite is a good way to catch fish. It was March 1987 when everything changed. The temperature had been sitting at 40 below for 2 weeks straight. The sea ice stretched out like a white desert, broken only by dark patches where the current kept the water moving. The polar night was finally ending, giving us a few hours of gray light each day. It should have been peaceful. I was partnered with David Milbrook that month. Dave had 12 years on the job and knew more about marine biology than anyone I'd ever met. He could tell you the breeding patterns of every seal species in Alaska and quote water temperature readings from memory. If something weird was happening in our waters, Dave would be the first to notice. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Our radio crackled to life while we were checking gear in the ranger station. Katmai Base, this is Tommy Anaktuvuk. You copy? I knew Tommy. He was an Inuit guide who helped us during the summer months. Good man. Knew these waters like the back of his hand. But he sounded scared, and Tommy didn't scare easy. We copy, Tommy. What's your situation? Got poachers out here near the breeding grounds. They're using explosives, James. Dynamite. The seals are gone. All of them. Dave and I looked at each other. Dynamite fishing was illegal everywhere, but especially here. The breeding grounds Tommy was talking about had been protected for 50 years. Hundreds of seals should have been there, getting ready for pupping season. Where exactly are you, Tommy? About 30 miles northeast of the old whaling station. The ice is. Jesus. James, you need to see this. Something's not right out here. The radio went quiet. Dave tried calling back, but we got nothing but static. Could be equipment failure, Dave said, but he didn't sound convinced. That storm last week might have damaged his radio. I pulled on my heavy coat and started loading gear into our snowmobile trailer. Emergency shelter, medical supplies, ice augers, flare guns, everything we'd need for a search and rescue operation. Pack extra batteries for the radio, I told Dave, and grab the backup GPS unit. If Tommy's in trouble, we need to find him fast. The ride out to the breeding grounds took 3 hours. The snowmobiles cut through the frozen landscape like knives through paper, but the cold bit through every layer of clothing we wore. My face felt like it was made of wood by the time we stopped for a break. Water temperature's up, Dave said, checking his instruments near an open patch of sea. 20 degrees warmer than normal. Could be a thermal vent opened up somewhere. I wasn't thinking about water temperature. I was looking at the ice formations scattered around us. They looked like people. Not vague shapes that might remind you of humans if you squinted. These looked like actual people frozen in ice. Men and women caught in the middle of running, their faces twisted in fear. Wind erosion, Dave said when I pointed them out. Amazing what nature can do. But I'd seen plenty of wind erosion in my 19 years. This wasn't natural. We found Tommy's camp an hour later, and that's when I knew we were dealing with something bigger than poachers. The camp was destroyed, not ransacked, destroyed. Tommy's tent had been shredded into ribbons so fine they looked like paper streamers. His supplies were scattered across the ice in perfect circles, like someone had arranged them deliberately. 3 rifles lay twisted into metal pretzels. their barrels bent in spirals that should have been impossible without heavy machinery. But it was the ammunition that really bothered me. Hundreds of bullets had been arranged in patterns across the white ice. Concentric circles, like ripples in water. Each bullet placed with careful precision. "What the hell happened here?" Dave whispered. I knelt beside one of the rifles. The metal was still warm to the touch, despite the 40 below temperature. That didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. "Tommy," I called out, my voice echoing across the empty ice. "Tommy Anaktuvuk." No answer. Just the wind and a sound I couldn't quite place, like singing, but underwater. Dave was studying the bullet patterns with his scientific eye. "This is deliberate," he said. "Someone arranged these. But why? And where's Tommy?" We searched for 2 hours before we found his snowmobile. It was 20 feet away from the camp, half melted through solid ice. The machine sat in a perfect hole, like someone had used a giant cookie cutter to remove a circle of ice around it. The edges were smooth as glass. "That's a 400-pound snowmobile," Dave said, staring into the hole. "How does it sink through ice that's 3 feet thick?" I had no answer. I was too busy looking at the tracks that led away from the hole. They were footprints, but wrong. Too long, too wide, with what looked like webbing between the toes. Each print was 18 inches long and filled with water that hadn't frozen despite the cold. "Dave," I said quietly, "look at these tracks." He came over, pulling out a measuring tape and camera. Dave always documented everything. "Jesus," he said, snapping pictures. "What kind of animal makes tracks like this?" The tracks led toward the water, but they didn't stop at the edge. They kept going, right into the sea, as if whatever made them had just walked into the depths without slowing down. That's when our radio started picking up the singing. It came through as static at first, just background noise. But as Dave adjusted the frequency, we could hear it clearly. A woman's voice, singing in a language I'd never heard. The melody was beautiful and sad, like a lullaby for the dead. "That's not possible," Dave said, checking the radio settings. "This frequency is for emergency communications only. Who's broadcasting music on an emergency channel?" The singing continued for 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, I heard something else, a splash, like something large moving through water. But the nearest open water was 100 yards away. "We need to set up camp," I said. "It'll be dark soon, and we can't search for Tommy in the polar night." Dave nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We'd both been rangers long enough to know when a situation was turning dangerous. Lost people, destroyed equipment, impossible tracks, none of it added up to anything good. We pitched our emergency shelter on what looked like solid ice, far enough from the water to feel safe. The shelter was a small dome tent, designed to handle Arctic conditions. Inside, it would stay warm enough to keep us alive until morning. But as we worked, I noticed Dave moving slower than usual. His hands shook as he hammered tent stakes into the ice, and his skin looked pale under his hood. "You feeling okay?" I asked. "Just cold," he said. "Colder than usual. Can't seem to get warm." I helped him finish setting up camp, but something was wrong with him. Despite wearing full Arctic gear, Dave's lips were turning blue. When he pulled off his gloves to work with the radio, I saw that his fingertips were gray. "Dave, you're showing signs of hypothermia. Get in the shelter and warm up." He nodded and crawled into the tent. I stayed outside for a few more minutes, checking our perimeter and making sure our supplies were secure. That's when I saw the hole. It hadn't been there when we'd set up camp. I was sure of it. But now, 50 feet from our shelter, there was a perfect circle of open water in the ice. The hole was 20 feet across, and the water inside was black as oil. Steam rose from the surface, even though the air temperature was still 40 below. I walked to the edge and looked down. The water was so dark I couldn't see the bottom. But something was moving down there. Something big, swimming in slow circles. I was about to call Dave when I saw the handprint. It was pressed into the snow beside the hole, still fresh. But it wasn't human. The fingers were too long, the palm too wide, and there was clear webbing between the digits. Water dripped from the print, forming a small puddle that should have frozen instantly but remained liquid. "Dave," I called. "You need to see this." No answer from the tent. I walked back to our shelter and unzipped the entrance. Dave was sitting in his sleeping bag, staring at the ice beneath our tent floor. His skin had turned a deeper shade of gray, and his eyes looked glassy. "Dave, what's wrong?" He pointed down without looking at me. "Something's under us," he whispered. "Swimming under the ice. I can feel it moving." I looked where he was pointing and felt my blood freeze. The ice beneath our tent had turned transparent, like glass. And through that crystal-clear surface, I could see into the dark water below. A shadow moved past, huge and fast. Then another. They were swimming in circles underneath us, and they were getting closer to the surface. I grabbed Dave's arm and pulled him out of the tent. "We're moving, now." "What's happening, James?" His voice was slurred, like he was drunk. "I feel so cold, so tired." The ice beneath our tent was completely transparent now, and I could see them clearly. 3 massive shapes, swimming in perfect formation. They moved like seals, but were too big, too coordinated, and they were coming up. I dragged Dave away from the tent, just as the ice exploded upward. Water and chunks of frozen sea shot into the air like a geyser. When the spray settled, our tent and all our gear were gone, sucked down into a hole that hadn't existed moments before. "Run," I told Dave, but he could barely walk. Whatever was happening to him was getting worse. His skin was almost blue-black now, and he kept trying to head toward the water. I half-carried him to where our snowmobiles were parked, but when I tried to start my machine, nothing happened. The engine was frozen solid, even though I'd winterized it properly just that morning. Dave's snowmobile was the same dead metal in the crushing cold. "The radio," Dave mumbled. "Try the radio." I pulled out our portable unit and switched it on. Instead of static, I heard that singing again. But now I could understand some of the words. They were in Inuktitut, the language my grandmother had spoken. Asterisk. Thieves of the sea's children. Breakers of the ancient treaty. The ice remembers. Asterisk. That's not possible, I said out loud. Radio waves can't travel underwater. But the voice was definitely coming from below the ice. And it was getting closer. Dave suddenly broke free from my grip and started walking toward the water. His movements were jerky, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. "Dave, stop." He turned to look at me, and I saw that his eyes had changed. They were solid black now, like a seal's eyes. "She's calling," he said in a voice that didn't sound like him anymore. "The water is warm. So warm." I tackled him before he could reach the edge, but he was stronger than he should have been. We wrestled in the snow, and I felt his skin through his clothes. It was cold as ice and somehow slick, like he was covered in water. That's when I saw her. She rose from the hole in the ice like something from a nightmare. 8 feet tall, moving like liquid shadow. Her body was human-shaped but covered in dark, seal-like skin. Her face was beautiful and terrible, the face of a woman, but with black eyes that held the depth of the ocean. Her hands ended in long fingers, with webbing between them, and her hair floated around her head like she was still underwater. She looked directly at me and spoke in my grandmother's language. Asterisk. You have disturbed the sacred waters. You have stolen from the sea's children with fire and thunder. The debt must be paid. Asterisk. Dave stopped struggling and turned toward her. "So beautiful," he whispered. "So cold and beautiful." The creature, the Kalupalik my grandmother had warned me about, stepped onto the ice without making a sound. Water didn't drip from her body. Instead, it seemed to flow upward, defying gravity. "Dave, fight it," I yelled. But he was already walking toward her. She reached out with one webbed hand and touched his forehead. Dave's body went rigid, then began to change. His skin darkened to match hers, and his fingers started to stretch and web together. "The poachers broke the old treaty," the Kalupalik said, and now she was speaking English with an accent like the ocean waves. "They used fire weapons in the sacred breeding grounds. They killed the sea's children with explosions and poison. You are rangers you are supposed to protect. Yet you let this happen." I pulled out my flare gun, the only weapon I had left. "Let him go. Dave didn't hurt anyone." She laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking. "He came to these waters. He breathed the cursed air above the poisoned sea. The mark is on him now." Dave was changing faster. His clothes fell away as his body elongated and darkened. Gills opened along his neck, and his black eyes grew larger. He looked at me one last time with something that might have been recognition, then turned and dove into the hole. The Kalupalik followed him into the water without a splash. For a moment, the ice was quiet again. Then I heard the explosions. Miles away, toward the old whaling station, pillars of fire lit up the night sky. Someone was still using dynamite out there, still destroying the breeding grounds. The Kalupalik had been telling the truth. There really were poachers operating in protected waters. But now I understood why Tommy's camp had been destroyed, why his equipment was twisted into impossible shapes. The Kalupalik wasn't just angry about the dynamite fishing. She was hunting everyone connected to it, and I was next. I started walking toward the explosions. It was probably suicide, but I couldn't just stand there and wait to be taken. If there were still poachers out there, maybe I could stop them. Maybe I could end this before the Kalupalik killed anyone else. The aurora borealis chose that moment to come alive above me. Green and blue lights danced across the sky, brighter than I'd ever seen them. And in that supernatural glow, the ice around me began to change. The entire surface became transparent, like walking on glass. I could see down into the dark water, could see shapes moving in the depths. Dave was down there, swimming alongside other figures that might once have been human. And rising toward me, moving faster than anything should be able to swim, was the Kalupalik. She burst through the ice right in front of me, sending me stumbling backward. Water cascaded from her body, freezing into intricate patterns on the ground. "You cannot stop what has already begun," she said. "The sea will reclaim what was stolen. The ice will take what it is owed." I fired the flare gun. The burning projectile passed right through her body without effect, as if she was made of water and shadow. "But you," she continued, reaching toward me with those impossible hands, "you carry the old blood. You remember the old ways. Your grandmother knew the truth. She was right. My grandmother had given me a carved ivory charm when I was 7 years old. I still wore it on a chain around my neck, hidden under my clothes. She'd made me promise never to take it off. Asterisk, for protection against the ice demons. Asterisk, she'd said. Asterisk, and to remember that we are all connected to the sea. Asterisk. The charm was burning cold against my chest now, so cold it felt like fire. The Kalupalik noticed and stepped back. "Anna," she whispered, "the old treaty. You carry the mark of the first agreement." "What agreement?" I asked, but she was already sinking back into the water. "Find the firebringers," she said as she disappeared. "Stop the thunder in the sacred waters, restore the balance, or I will take everyone who sets foot on this ice." The aurora faded, and the ice became solid again. I was alone on the frozen sea, with no equipment, no transportation, and no backup coming. But I knew what I had to do. I had to find the poachers and stop them before the Kalupalik turned the entire coast into a graveyard. The explosions had stopped, but smoke still rose from the direction of the old whaling station. I walked for 2 hours across the transparent ice, following the smell of dynamite and diesel fuel. The aurora kept flickering overhead, and every time the lights pulsed, I could see movement in the water below. Things that swam like seals but were too large, too intelligent. The Kalupalik was down there, and she wasn't alone. I found the poachers' camp just after midnight. 3 men with a boat that had been dragged up onto the ice. They'd cut a channel through the frozen surface to bring their vessel close to the breeding grounds. Nets full of dead seals lay scattered around their camp, and boxes of dynamite sat stacked beside a portable generator. These weren't locals. Their equipment was too expensive, too professional. This was organized crime. The kind of operation that could wipe out an entire seal population in a single season. I crouched behind an ice ridge and watched them work. They were loading their boat with seal carcasses, preparing to leave. One of them, a tall man with a thick beard, was talking into a radio. "Yeah, we're done here," he was saying. "Got about 300 seals." The dynamite worked great, stunned whole groups at once, much easier than hunting them one by one. 300 seals. In a single night, they'd killed 300 protected animals. No wonder the Kalupalik was furious. I was about to reveal myself and try to arrest them when the ice beneath their boat began to glow. The aurora was reflecting off the transparent surface, and I could see massive shapes moving toward us from all directions. The poachers saw it too. "What the hell is that?" one of them said, pointing at the water. The ice around their boat started to crack, not breaking, just developing thin lines that spread outward like a spider's web. Water seeped up through the cracks, black and oily in the strange light. "We need to go," the bearded man said. "Now." They tried to start their boat's engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Just like our snowmobiles, their equipment had been sabotaged by the cold, or by something else. The singing started again, rising from the water below. Multiple voices this time, harmonizing in a language that made my bones ache. The poachers stopped trying to escape and just stood there, listening. "It's beautiful," one of them whispered. "Like mermaids." That's when the Kalupalik rose from the cracks in the ice. Not just one, dozens of them. They flowed upward like living water, taking human shape as they reached the surface. Men and women with seal skin and ocean eyes, moving with the grace of creatures born to swim. Some were ancient, their faces marked with the wisdom of centuries. Others looked newly changed, their features still partly human. I saw Dave among them. His transformation was complete, now dark skin, webbed hands, eyes like black pearls. But he looked at me with recognition and nodded once before turning toward the poachers. The tallest Kalupalik, the matriarch I'd encountered before, stepped onto solid ice and spoke in perfect English. "You have murdered the sea's children," she said to the three men. "You have broken the sacred treaty with fire and thunder. What payment will you make for this crime?" The bearded man pulled out a pistol and fired 6 shots at her. The bullets passed through her body like she was made of mist, and she didn't even flinch. "Iron cannot harm us," she said. "Fire cannot burn us. We are the children of ice and water, and we have been here since before your ancestors dreamed of crossing the sea." The other Kalupalik began to circle the poachers, moving like sharks around bleeding prey. Their singing grew louder, more complex, and I could feel it affecting my mind. It was hypnotic, compelling, like it was reaching into my brain and rearranging my thoughts. "Take us," I shouted, stepping out from behind the ice ridge. "Take me instead of them." The matriarch turned to look at me, and the other Kalupalik stopped their advance. "You offer yourself for these murderers?" she asked. "I'm a ranger," I said, walking slowly toward them. "It's my job to protect the wildlife in these waters. I failed to stop these men, so their crimes are my responsibility." The ivory charm around my neck was burning cold again, but I ignored the pain. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory, telling me stories about the old times when humans and sea spirits lived in balance. "The old treaty," I said, remembering her words. "Humans were allowed to hunt seals for food and survival, but only a few, and only with respect for the spirits of the sea. These men broke that agreement." The matriarch nodded. "Your grandmother was a keeper of the old ways. She understood the balance." I pulled the ivory charm from my neck and held it up. It was carved in the shape of a seal, but as I looked at it in the aurora's light, I could see it was something else too. A Kalupalik, swimming through waves that were also clouds. "She gave me this to remember," I said. "To remember that we're all connected to the sea." "And will you honor that connection?" the matriarch asked. "Will you take responsibility for maintaining the balance?" I looked at the 3 poachers, who were standing frozen in terror. Then I looked at Dave, who had once been my partner and friend. The choice was clear. "Yes," I said, "I'll make sure the old treaty is respected." The matriarch smiled, and it was beautiful and terrible. "Then let these firebringers learn the price of their crimes." She gestured to the other Kalupalik, and they surged forward like a wave. The poachers screamed as they were dragged through the ice, their bodies disappearing into the dark water below. The ice sealed itself behind them, leaving no trace they had ever been there except for their abandoned equipment. "They will not die," the matriarch said to me, "but they will learn to breathe water and hunt fish instead of slaughtering the innocent. They will serve the sea until they understand what they have destroyed." She turned to go, then paused. "And you, James Kovalak, you carry the mark now. You will feel the sea's pain when it is hurt, and you will know when the balance is threatened. Guard the waters well." She touched my forehead with one webbed finger. Pain shot through my skull like lightning, and I felt something fundamental change inside me. When the agony faded, the world looked different. I could hear the heartbeats of seals miles away, could sense the movement of whales in distant waters. My eyes had changed. I could see clearly in the aurora's light, could make out details that should have been invisible. "Welcome to the Covenant," the matriarch said. And then she and all the other Kalupalik sank back into the ice. I was alone on the frozen sea. But I wasn't the same person who had come out here to look for Tommy Anaktuvuk. I was something new, something in between human and spirit, a guardian of the balance between land and sea. Dave surfaced one last time, his changed face breaking through the ice near my feet. "Thank you," he said in a voice like waves on shore. For understanding, for choosing the right side. Then he was gone, swimming down into the depths with his new family. I walked back to the ranger station as the sun rose, painting the ice fields gold and pink. The temperature was still 40 below, but I barely felt the cold. My body had changed along with everything else. The parallel scars across my chest, marks left by the matriarch's touch, seemed to generate their own heat. The official report was simple: equipment failure and icebreak accidents. Dave Millbrook had fallen through unstable ice and drowned. The poachers had never existed, according to my paperwork. Tommy and Oktavuk had gotten lost in a storm and would probably turn up when the ice melted in spring. Nobody questioned my story. Rangers died out here. Sometimes it was a dangerous job. The Coast Guard searched for Dave's body for 3 days, then gave up. The ice was too thick, the water too deep, but I knew where he was. I could feel him sometimes, swimming in the dark currents beneath the frozen surface. He was happy down there, or as close to happy as someone could be after dying and being reborn as something else. My supervisor wanted to transfer me to a warmer posting after Dave's accident, but I convinced him to let me stay. Someone had to watch the waters, someone had to make sure the old treaty was respected, and I was good at my job now, better than I'd ever been. I could sense illegal fishing operations from miles away, could feel the pain of injured sea animals like it was happening to my own body. When sport fishermen tried to use too much dynamite, their boats would mysteriously break down. When hunting guides brought clients to protected waters, they'd find their equipment had vanished overnight. The locals started calling me the Seal Ranger. They said I had an uncanny ability to show up wherever poaching was happening, like I could smell trouble on the wind. They weren't wrong, though it wasn't smell I was using. Sometimes, when the aurora was particularly bright, I would stand on the ice and look down through the transparent surface. I could see them down there, Dave and the others, swimming in graceful formations through underwater forests of kelp and coral. They looked peaceful, they looked free, and sometimes, when I looked at my reflection in still water, I could see the changes happening to me. My eyes were darker now, more like a seal's than a human's. My fingers had developed a slight webbing between them, barely visible but definitely there. When the tide was particularly high, the webbing became more pronounced. I was becoming something else, slowly but inevitably. The matriarch had warned me this would happen. The covenant came with a price. Guardians of the balance couldn't remain entirely human. We were bridges between two worlds, and bridges belonged fully to neither side. I didn't mind. My old life had died with my wife anyway. This new existence had purpose, meaning I was protecting something ancient and important, maintaining an agreement that went back thousands of years. 3 months after Dave disappeared, I got a call from a fishing vessel reporting strange sonar readings near the breeding grounds. When I arrived to investigate, I found a group of marine biology students from the university. They were taking water samples and photographing the seals, nothing illegal about their work. But as I watched them through binoculars, I felt the familiar burning sensation across my chest. Something was wrong. The lead researcher, a woman in her 30s with short brown hair, was injecting something into sedated seals. Whatever it was causing them pain. I could feel their distress like needles under my skin. I confronted her at their campsite that evening. "What are you injecting into the seals?" I asked. She looked surprised. "Just tracking devices. We're studying their migration patterns." But when I examined one of the devices, I could see it was something else entirely. A small transmitter, but also something that looked like a tiny drill bit. These weren't tracking devices, they were designed to bore into the seals' brains, to cause pain and confusion. "Why?" I asked. "Military research," she admitted when she realized I wasn't backing down. "We're studying how marine mammals respond to sonic weapons. The Navy wants to develop underwater defense systems." They were torturing seals for weapons research, using protected animals as test subjects for machines designed to cause suffering. The old treaty meant nothing to them. That night, when the aurora came alive above their camp, I stood on the ice and called to the depths. I didn't use words. I didn't need them anymore. I just opened my mind and let my anger flow into the dark water below. The researchers' equipment started malfunctioning within an hour. Their boat engine froze solid. Their radio died. Their sample containers cracked. spilling toxic chemicals onto the ice where they froze into colorful, deadly crystals. And then the singing started. They packed up and left before dawn, abandoning their research and their torture devices. I made sure their equipment sank through the ice where it could never be recovered. The seals they'd experimented on recovered within days. The devices simply fell out of their skulls during the next full moon, like their bodies had rejected the foreign metal. I found the transmitters on the ice the next morning, corroded beyond recognition by what looked like seawater. That's when I understood the full extent of my new abilities. I wasn't just a guardian, I was connected to every living thing in these waters. I could heal the injured, protect the innocent, and call upon powers older than human civilization when the balance was threatened. But with each use of these abilities, I became a little less human. The webbing between my fingers grew more pronounced. My need for warmth diminished. I found myself holding my breath for longer and longer periods, sometimes forgetting to breathe at all. One day, I knew. I would walk into the sea and never come back to the surface. I would join Dave and the others in their underwater realm, trading my human form for something that could better serve the ancient covenant. But not yet. Not while there were still people who needed to learn the old ways, still threats to the balance that required a guardian who could walk on both land and sea. I am James Kovalak, the last seal hunter. But I don't hunt seals anymore, I hunt the hunters. I protect the protected. And when the time comes, when my human life has served its purpose, I will take my place among the Kalupalik and continue the watch from beneath the ice. The sea remembers everything, the ice never forgets, and neither do I. My name is Michael Tundra, and I've been a park ranger at Denali for 16 years. People always laugh at my last name, say it fits too well for a guy who works in Alaska's frozen wilderness. Maybe it does. Maybe that's why I've lasted so long up here when other rangers transfer out after a season or two. I'm 39 now, divorced, and I spend most of my time alone on the high peaks above treeline. It's dangerous work, rescuing climbers who get in over their heads, maintaining emergency shelters at altitude, making sure people don't die stupid deaths in beautiful places. Before this job, I was Air Force pararescue. I jumped out of helicopters to save people who couldn't save themselves. Now I do the same thing, just without the helicopter most of the time. The thing about working alone in the mountains is that you see things. Weird things. Weather that doesn't make sense. Animal tracks where they shouldn't be. Sounds that carry too far or echo wrong off the rocks. After 16 years, I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. November 1983 started cold. Even for Alaska. By the third week, we had winds hitting 70 miles per hour and snow falling so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The kind of weather that kills people if they're not ready for it. The kind that keeps helicopters grounded and leaves you truly alone up there. That's when the call came in about the missing climbing party. 4 experienced climbers had been attempting a technical route up Mount McKinley's north face. They'd checked in by radio 3 days earlier from their camp at 8,000 feet. Everything normal, good weather forecast, then nothing. Last transmission was weird, Rebecca Frost told me as we loaded our gear. Rebecca was my partner for high-altitude rescues. 11 years of experience, tough as granite, and the best high-altitude medic in the Park Service. They reported finding massive bear tracks around their camp. I paused, checking my avalanche beacon. Bear tracks at 8,000 feet in November? That's what I said. No bears should be active that high this time of year. They should be denned up for winter. The missing party included Janet Tundra, my ex-wife. We'd been divorced 2 years, but she'd called me a month earlier. Said she wanted to try again, make things work. This climb was supposed to be her way of showing me she understood why I loved these mountains so much. Now she was missing somewhere up there, and the weather was getting worse. Rebecca and I started our approach in whiteout conditions. The wind cut through every piece of gear we had, and the snow fell in sheets so thick our headlamps barely penetrated 5 feet ahead. We followed GPS coordinates and compass bearings, moving by feel and instinct across terrain I'd traveled 100 times before. But something felt wrong from the start. The snow wasn't falling right. Instead of the random swirl you expect in high winds, it seemed to form patterns, spirals that lasted too long, shapes that looked almost deliberate. I told myself it was the wind playing tricks, creating vortexes off the rock faces. "Mike," Rebecca called from behind me, her voice muffled by the storm. "Look at this." She was kneeling in the snow, staring at something in the beam of her headlamp. I fought my way back to her against the wind. Bear tracks, massive ones. The paws had to be 8 inches across, maybe more. They led up the slope toward the missing party's last known position. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was watching them fade. As we knelt there in the snow, the tracks became less distinct. Edges softened. Within minutes, they were gone completely, filled in by wind that seemed to be blowing from every direction at once. "Did you see that?" Rebecca asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. 16 years in these mountains, and I'd never seen snow behave like that. Windfill happens, but gradually. This was like watching the mountain erase evidence on purpose. We pushed higher, following our planned route toward the climbing party's camp. The storm seemed to be getting worse, which shouldn't have been possible. Weather reports had shown the system moving through, not building. Every step took us further from any hope of evacuation. If something went wrong up here, we were on our own until the weather broke. In conditions like this, that could be days, or longer. As we climbed, I kept thinking about those bear tracks, about how they'd disappeared, about Janet, somewhere up ahead in this storm. I'd been telling myself for 16 years that I understood these mountains, that I knew all their dangers and how to handle them. But I was starting to realize there were things up here I'd never encountered before, things that maybe didn't want to be encountered. We found their first camp at dawn, or what passed for dawn in the storm. The snow was still falling hard, but the wind had died down enough for us to see more than a few feet ahead. The tents were gone, not collapsed from wind or buried by snow, gone. We found the platform they'd cut into the slope, scattered gear, sleeping bags torn and scattered, but no tents, no people. "Equipment check," I called to Rebecca, falling back on procedures when nothing else made sense. We spread out in a search pattern, looking for clues about what had happened. Rebecca found the first piece of tent fabric 50 feet up a vertical rock face, hanging from a crack no human could reach without technical climbing gear. The fabric was shredded, torn in parallel lines like claw marks. Big claw marks. "Mike," she called, her voice tight. "You need to see this." I followed her voice to the base of the cliff. She was staring up at something, her face pale in the gray light. There were claw marks carved into the granite. Deep gouges, 6 inches apart, running in parallel lines up the vertical rock face. They climbed higher than our ropes could reach, disappearing into the storm above. "No bear can do that," Rebecca whispered. "No animal can climb vertical granite and cut marks that deep." I touched one of the gouges with my glove. The edges were sharp, fresh. Whatever had made them had incredible strength and claws harder than steel. "There has to be an explanation," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. We followed the trail of scattered gear up the slope. Pieces of equipment appeared every few hundred yards. A water bottle here, a crampon there, a sleeping bag torn to pieces and draped across rocks like decoration. All of it placed impossibly high. The pattern led us toward the climbing route the party had been attempting. As we climbed, the storm began to change again. The snow kept falling, but the wind started moving in directions that made no sense. Updrafts, when there should be downdrafts. Gusts that seemed to come from directly above. That's when we heard the first roar. It came from somewhere above the cloud layer, echoing off the peaks around us. Deep, powerful, not quite like any animal I'd ever heard. It had the bass rumble of a bear, but bigger, much bigger. Rebecca grabbed my arm. "What was that?" Before I could answer, the sound came again, longer this time, rolling across the mountains like thunder. But thunder doesn't have that organic quality, that sense of breath and throat and living rage. "Could be wind through the rock formations," I said, knowing it wasn't true. "Wind doesn't roar back when you make noise," Rebecca replied. She was right. I'd whistled a signal while she spoke, the sharp blast we used to locate each other in storms. The roar that answered came from directly above us, too close and too immediate to be coincidence. We kept climbing. We had to. Somewhere up there, 4 people were missing, including Janet. Whatever was happening, we couldn't turn back now. The next sign we found was blood. Frozen droplets of it, scattered across the snow in a trail that led up the mountainside. but not a normal blood trail. These droplets were frozen in the air, suspended 3 and 4 feet above the ground like they'd been dropped from a great height. I reached up and touched one with my glove. It was solid ice, but still red inside, fresh. "This is impossible," Rebecca said, staring at the floating blood. "Blood doesn't freeze in mid-air. Physics doesn't work that way." I was starting to think physics worked differently up here. We followed the blood trail higher, moving through terrain that was becoming increasingly difficult. The route took us across exposed ridges where the wind tried to tear us off the mountain, through narrow couloirs filled with loose rock and fresh snow. And always, the sense that something was watching us from above. The clouds hung low, maybe 100 feet over our heads, but they moved wrong. Instead of drifting with the wind, they seemed to track our movement, staying directly overhead no matter which direction we went. "Rebecca," I called during a rest stop, "look at the clouds." She tilted her head back, squinting up through the falling snow. As we watched, the cloud cover began to thin in one spot, creating a gap that revealed the mountainside above us. Something was moving up there. At first I thought it was just shadows and light playing tricks in the storm. But the movement was too deliberate, too purposeful. Something large was traversing the slope above the cloud line, moving with the easy confidence of a predator in its territory. The gap in the clouds began to close, but not before we both saw it clearly. A bear. Massive beyond any bear that should exist. Moving across terrain that would be impossible for any normal animal. Moving through the air. "Tell me you saw that," Rebecca whispered. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Whatever we were tracking, it wasn't bound by the rules I'd spent 16 years learning to respect in these mountains. The roar came again, closer this time. Much closer. And underneath it, carried on the wind, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Human voices. Calling for help. From somewhere, up in those clouds. We climbed faster after hearing the voices, abandoning caution for speed. If there were survivors up there, they wouldn't last long in this weather. But the voices kept moving. Every time we thought we'd located the source, the calls would come from a different direction. First from above and to the left. Then from below and to the right. Then from directly overhead, where no human could possibly be. "It's the acoustics," I told Rebecca during a brief rest, shouting over the wind. "Sound bounces weird in these formations." But I didn't believe it. And neither did she. The voices were being moved, controlled, used. Something was playing with us. We pushed higher, into terrain that should have been impossible to navigate in storm conditions. But somehow, we kept finding a path. Handholds appeared just when we needed them. The wind would die down just long enough for us to make a difficult move. Snow would compact underfoot exactly when we needed stable footing. It was like the mountain wanted us to keep climbing. Rebecca was starting to show signs of altitude sickness, which was strange. She was acclimatized to this elevation, had climbed at this level dozens of times before, but she was moving slower, breathing harder, and making small mistakes she'd never normally make. "Need to rest," she gasped, dropping to her knees in the snow. I checked her pupils with my headlamp. They were dilated, unfocused, classic signs of cerebral edema, but we weren't high enough for that to be a factor. "When did this start?" I asked. "About an hour ago, right after we saw..." She gestured vaguely upward. "Right after we saw that thing." I gave her oxygen from my emergency tank and checked her pulse, rapid but strong. Blood pressure seemed normal, but something was definitely wrong. "Mike," she said, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Something's in my head. I can feel it moving around, looking at my memories." That's when I noticed her eyes. They were the same brown they'd always been, but they reflected light differently now, like animal eyes caught in a flashlight beam. "We need to get you down," I said. "No." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "We need to go up. It wants us to go up." She stood and started climbing before I could stop her, moving with a fluid grace that looked nothing like her normal climbing style. She was covering difficult ground too easily, finding routes that shouldn't exist. I followed, because leaving her alone wasn't an option. The storm was changing again. Instead of random snow and wind, it was forming patterns. Spirals of snow that lasted too long. Wind that seemed to respond to our movements. And underneath it all, a sound like breathing. Deep, slow inhalations and exhalations that made the whole mountain seem alive. We found more evidence of the missing party as we climbed. personal items scattered across impossible terrain, a sleeping bag frozen to the underside of an overhanging rock, climbing gear embedded in vertical ice walls like they'd been thrown with tremendous force. And everywhere, those massive claw marks. They were carved into every surface now, rocks, ice, even the snow itself, always pointing upward, leading us higher into the storm. "Rebecca," I called, trying to keep pace with her suddenly enhanced climbing ability. "We need to talk about what's happening to you." She turned to look at me, and for a moment, her face wasn't entirely human. The bone structure was subtly wrong, the proportions shifted, her teeth looked sharper. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "I understand now. We're being invited." Invited by what? By the Guardian. By Tornarsuk. I'd never heard that word before, but somehow I knew what it meant. Ancient fear, coded into human DNA, the thing that hunts from above. The presence that rules the high places where earth touches sky. Rebecca started climbing again, moving with inhuman speed and confidence. I struggled to keep up, my normal human limitations becoming increasingly obvious. The clouds above us began to part, revealing glimpses of what lay beyond. Something was waiting up there. Something massive and patient and hungry. I thought about Janet, somewhere up in that space between earth and sky. I thought about 16 years of believing I understood these mountains. I kept climbing, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant never knowing what had happened to the people I was supposed to protect. But with every step, I could feel the thing above us getting closer. And I was starting to understand that we weren't rescuing anyone. We were being collected. The roar came again, so close now it shook loose rock from the cliff faces. And this time, mixed in with that inhuman sound, I heard voices I recognized. Janet's voice. Calling my name. From directly above the clouds parted like curtains being drawn back, revealing what waited above. Tornarsuk stood on empty air 100 feet overhead, 12 feet of impossible bear spirit, white fur rippling with aurora light. It wasn't fully solid. I could see through it to the storm beyond, but it cast shadows on the snow below. Its eyes were blue-white stars, ancient and patient and utterly alien. And it wasn't alone. 4 figures stood on the air beside it, the missing climbing party, including Janet. But they weren't human anymore. They moved with the same fluid grace Rebecca was developing, their eyes reflecting that same unnatural light. "Mike," Janet's voice drifted down through the storm, but her mouth wasn't moving. "Come up, it's beautiful up here." Rebecca laughed beside me, the sound carrying those impossible harmonics. "Do you see now? Do you understand what we're being offered?" I stared up at the impossible scene above me. My ex-wife, transformed into something between human and spirit, standing on empty air beside a creature that shouldn't exist. "They're dead," I whispered. "No," Rebecca said, and when I looked at her, her transformation was nearly complete. Her hands had become claws, her face elongated into something between human and bear. "They're elevated, chosen, made into guardians of the sacred places." Tornarsuk moved then, flowing through the air with predatory grace. It descended slowly, deliberately, enjoying my fear. As it came closer, I could see the intelligence in its ancient eyes. This wasn't some mindless monster. It was a force of nature with consciousness and purpose. It spoke, not with words, but with images that formed directly in my mind. I saw the history of these mountains, the sacred places where earth touched sky. I saw generations of climbers and explorers who had violated those spaces without permission, without respect, without understanding. I saw what happened to them. "The mountains belong to themselves," Rebecca said, translating thoughts I was receiving from the creature above. "Humans are allowed to visit, but only with proper respect. Only with understanding of what they're entering." Tornarsuk landed on the slope above me with impossible lightness, its massive paws barely disturbing the snow. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Solid enough to leave tracks, ethereal enough to phase in and out of visibility. Power radiated from it like heat from a furnace. It reached toward me with one enormous paw, claws extended. I thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. I thought about fighting, but what do you fight with against a creature made of storm and starlight? Then I remembered something from my Air Force training. A survival course where we'd learned about indigenous protocols for entering sacred spaces. Offerings. Respect. recognition that some places belonged to powers greater than human understanding. I pulled off my climbing gear, helmet, harness, ice axes, everything that marked me as someone trying to conquer this place rather than visit it respectfully. I set each piece carefully in the snow, then stepped back. "I'm not here to take anything," I said, not sure if the creature could understand human speech. "I'm here to help people who got lost." Tornarsuk's star-bright eyes studied me for what felt like hours. The wind died completely, leaving us in supernatural silence. Even the snow stopped falling. Then it spoke again, images flooding my mind. I saw the truth about the missing party. They hadn't been killed, they'd been recruited, transformed into guardians who would protect these sacred high places from future violations. It was an honor, in its way. A form of immortality, but it came with a price. I looked up at Janet, floating in the air above me with eyes like frozen starlight. She was still there, somewhere inside that transformed being. But she was also something else now, something that belonged more to the mountain than to the human world below. "Let me take their gear down," I said. "Let me tell people they died in an avalanche. Clean death, quick burial. Their families will have closure, and your sacred places stay protected." Tornarsuk considered this. The wind began to pick up again, swirling around us in patterns that looked almost like writing in the air. Finally, it nodded, a gesture so human, it was somehow more terrifying than anything else it had done. The deal was struck. But there was one more condition. The creature reached out and touched my forehead with one massive claw. Pain shot through my skull like lightning, followed by images I didn't understand. When it was over, I felt different, changed, marked. "Now you belong to the mountains too," Rebecca said, her transformation complete. She looked like a bear walking upright, but with intelligence that was purely human. Not transformed like us, but connected. "You'll be the bridge between worlds." Tornarsuk and its new guardians began to fade back into the storm, becoming transparent, then invisible. But I could still feel their presence above me, watching, protecting, waiting. "Remember the rules," Janet's voice whispered on the wind. "Respect the sacred places. Keep people safe." Then they were gone, leaving me alone in the storm with gear scattered around me and frostburns on my forehead in the shape of bear claws. I gathered what I could carry and began the long descent, feeling eyes on me from above with every step. The official report was simple. Climbing party lost to avalanche, bodies unrecoverable. Happens more often than people like to think in mountains like these. Rebecca's disappearance was listed as a separate incident, high-altitude rescue gone wrong, another casualty of impossible weather. Nobody questioned my account. Why would they? I was the experienced ranger who'd gone up in dangerous conditions to try to save people. The fact that I came back alone and traumatized just proved how dangerous those conditions had been. But I knew the truth, and I was changed by it. The frostburns on my forehead healed into permanent scars that look like claw marks. They ache before weather changes, giving me supernatural accuracy at predicting mountain storms. I can smell snow coming 3 days before it hits. I can hear the mountain's moods and the wind patterns. My body hair grows thicker now. I don't get cold the way I used to. My eyes reflect light in the dark, and I can see perfectly on nights when other people are blind. Sometimes I dream of running on 4 legs above the cloud line, of understanding the language of bears and storms. I wake from these dreams with Rebecca's laughter echoing in my mind and the taste of snow on my tongue. But the most important change is my new role. I watch the sacred places now. When climbers come planning routes that will take them into areas Tornarsuk protects, I find reasons to redirect them. Equipment failures, weather warnings, suggestions for alternative routes that are more scenic or less technically demanding. Most of the time, they listen. The mountains are dangerous enough without seeking out the truly sacred peaks. Sometimes they don't listen. When that happens, I follow traditional protocols. I leave offerings at tree line, gear arranged in patterns that mean respect and permission requested. I speak warnings in the old languages I somehow learned during my encounter with Tornarsuk. I do what I can to prepare them for what they might encounter above the clouds. Usually, it's enough. The guardians recognize proper respect when they see it, and safe passage is granted. But not always. Last month, a climbing party went missing on the north face. Despite my warnings, I found their base camp empty, gear scattered in the familiar patterns, claw marks carved deep into the granite. I filed the usual report. Avalanche. Bodies unrecoverable. Tragic accident. But that night, I saw them in my dreams. 5 new guardians standing on empty air beside Tornersuk, eyes bright with starlight, protecting the sacred places where earth touches sky. The mountains remember everything. Every climber who shows proper respect, every explorer who understands they're entering a living, conscious space, and every violator who treats these peaks like conquered territory. I'm still a park ranger. Still rescue people who get in over their heads. But now I know there are some rescues that aren't meant to happen. Some people who are called to serve something larger than their human lives. On clear nights, when the aurora dances above the peaks, I can see them up there. Rebecca, Janet, and all the others who became something more than human. They wave sometimes, and I wave back, understanding that they made a choice between death and transformation, and chose something that might be better than either. The warnings I leave for new climbers are simple. Respect the mountain. Ask permission. Leave offerings. The peaks are alive up here, and they're watching. Most people think it's just colorful local folklore. They're wrong. And every full moon, when I catch sight of my reflection in still water, I can see bare features in my face, growing stronger, year by year. I wonder sometimes if I'm becoming something else too. Something between human and guardian, meant to serve as a bridge between the world of people and the world of spirits. I think I'm okay with that. The mountains need protection, the sacred places need guardians. And I've learned there are worse fates than belonging to something larger and older and more patient than human understanding. The hunger above treeline is real. But it's not mindless. It's just very, very selective about who gets to come home. My name is Elizabeth Nightfall, and I've been a park ranger for 21 years. I've seen bears charge at full speed, survived 3 avalanches, and once spent 4 days trapped in a snow cave eating nothing but energy bars. But nothing in my experience prepared me for what happened in the Brooks Range during the winter of 1979. People always ask how I ended up way out there, 300 miles from the nearest town, watching the sky in the middle of nowhere. The truth is, I chose it. After getting my PhD in atmospheric science, I could have worked anywhere, universities, weather stations, even NASA. But I wanted to study the aurora borealis where it's strongest, where the lights dance so close to Earth you can almost touch them. The research station sits on a ridge overlooking endless tundra. No trees, just frozen ground stretching to every horizon. In January, the sun doesn't rise for weeks. The only light comes from our generator-powered station and the green curtains that ripple across the star-filled sky. I wasn't alone out there. Dr. Carl Borealis had been my research partner for 8 years. Carl was the kind of scientist who got excited about electromagnetic readings the way kids get excited about ice cream. He'd set up instruments in -40 weather, wearing a grin you could see through his frost-covered face mask. We also had help from Mary Aknavigak, an Inuit woman who knew more about surviving in the Arctic than both of us combined. Mary brought her 16-year-old son Tommy to help with equipment maintenance. They were supposed to stay through February, then head back to their village before the spring thaw made travel impossible. That first week of January, everything seemed normal. We took readings, tracked aurora patterns, and radioed our data to the university twice a day. Carl was thrilled because the solar activity was stronger than usual. The northern lights weren't just visible, they were putting on a show that would have made tourists pay thousands to see. "Look at these readings," Carl said on January 7th, pointing at his instruments. "The electromagnetic field is off the charts. This is the kind of data we've been waiting years to collect." But Mary seemed worried. She kept glancing at the sky with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. "My grandmother told me stories about lights like these," she said quietly while we cooked dinner. She said, "When the spirits dance too close to Earth, they sometimes forget to go home." I smiled and nodded, but inside I was thinking like a scientist. Folk tales were interesting from a cultural perspective, but they didn't explain electromagnetic phenomena. What we were seeing had to do with solar wind particles interacting with Earth's magnetic field. Beautiful, yes. Supernatural? No. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of our radio crackling. Carl was supposed to be monitoring it, but when I walked to the communications area, I found him standing outside without a coat, staring up at the sky. The aurora that night was unlike anything I'd seen in 2 decades of research. Instead of the usual green curtains, the lights were forming shapes almost like people dancing in the sky. The colors were more intense too, with blues and purples mixed in with the green. "Carl," I called. "You'll freeze out there." He turned to look at me, and I noticed his eyes seemed to reflect the aurora light. "Elizabeth, do you see them? They're dancing." "Of course they're dancing. That's what we call it when the lights move." "No," he said, his voice dreamy. "I mean really dancing, like people." I led him inside and made him hot coffee. His skin was ice cold, but he didn't seem to notice. He kept talking about the patterns, how they seemed to respond when he moved. I figured it was just his excitement about the unusual activity, maybe combined with a touch of cabin fever. But as I poured myself coffee, I heard something that made my hands freeze around the mug. Through the static on our radio came a sound that definitely wasn't electromagnetic interference. It was singing human voices, harmonizing in a language I didn't recognize. I turned the radio dial, trying to find the source. Every frequency carried the same ethereal singing, as if it was coming from everywhere at once. "Mary," I called softly, not wanting to wake Tommy. "Can you come listen to this?" Mary emerged from the sleeping area and listened for a moment. Her face went pale. "We need to pack up," she said. "Tonight." "What?" "Why? Those aren't radio signals." She pointed at the sky visible through our window. "That's them singing." I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I dozed off, I'd hear that singing drifting through the walls. Mary spent most of the dark hours packing her and Tommy's gear, muttering prayers in her native language. By morning, the singing had stopped, but something else was wrong. Our instruments were showing readings that shouldn't have been possible. The electromagnetic sensors indicated aurora activity at ground level, not in the sky where it belonged, but right here around our station. "The equipment must be malfunctioning," I told Carl as we checked the readings for the 3rd time. "All of it?" he asked. "Every single sensor?" Carl had a point. We had backup systems for everything, and they were all showing the same impossible data. According to our instruments, we were sitting inside an aurora field. When Tommy went outside to check the generator, he came running back within minutes. "There are footprints," he said, breathing hard. "But they're glowing." Mary immediately grabbed her parka. "Show me." We all followed Tommy around to the north side of the station. In the snow, clear as day, were human footprints leading away from our building. But these weren't normal tracks. They glowed with a soft green light, the same color as the aurora. Carl knelt down and held his hand over one of the prints. "They're warm," he said. "The snow around them hasn't refrozen." I tried to think logically. Maybe someone had spilled phosphorescent paint, or there was some kind of chemical reaction happening in the snow. But as we followed the tracks, my scientific explanations started falling apart. The footprints led in a straight line across the tundra for about 50 yards, then simply stopped. Not like someone had walked away, they just ended, as if whoever was making them had vanished into thin air. "We're leaving," Mary said firmly. "Today." "Mary, we can't abandon a research project because of some unusual snow formations," I said. She grabbed my arm and looked me straight in the eyes. "My grandmother survived the winter of 1943. She was at the weather station 20 miles from here when the lights came down. She was the only one who made it out." "What weather station?" "Government research post. They were studying the same things you study." One night, the aurora touched the ground. 3 days later, search teams found the whole crew sitting outside in the snow, staring at the sky. Alive, but their minds were gone. They never spoke again. Carl laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, that's just a story." 14 men, Mary continued. All found in a perfect circle, sitting in the snow without coats in -50 weather. No frostbite, not even cold. Like something was keeping them warm while it emptied their heads. I wanted to dismiss it as folklore, but something about Mary's voice convinced me she was telling the truth, at least about the facts as she knew them. That afternoon, we tried to radio for pickup, but our communications were completely scrambled. Every frequency carried either static or that haunting singing. We couldn't reach the university, the park service, or even the emergency channels. "It's probably solar interference," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it wasn't true. Solar interference didn't create harmonized singing in unknown languages. As evening approached, Carl became more and more excited about the approaching darkness. He kept checking his instruments and staring out the window. "Tonight's going to be special," he said. "I can feel it. The electromagnetic readings are building toward something big." Mary pulled me aside while Carl was obsessing over his equipment. "We need to tie him down," she said. "What? What?" "He's being called. I've seen it before, when I was a child. The lights pick someone, and they start hearing things, feeling things. If he goes outside during a display, we'll never get him back." "Mary, you're talking about my research partner, not some kind of zombie." But even as I said it, I noticed Carl's behavior was getting stranger. He kept humming under his breath the same melody we'd heard on the radio. His eyes seemed brighter than usual, and he hadn't eaten anything all day. Just after sunset, the aurora began. This time, there was no mistaking it for natural phenomenon. The lights descended from the sky like luminous curtains, touching the ground around our station. Through the windows, I could see individual beams of light moving independently, weaving between our equipment, exploring. Carl stood up abruptly. "They're here," he whispered. Before any of us could stop him, he walked to the door and stepped outside. The lights immediately swarmed toward him. I watched through the window as Carl stood with his arms raised, bathed in green and blue aurora light. He was laughing, spinning in circles like a child. "Carl!" I shouted, but he couldn't hear me over the singing that had started again, louder this time, coming from everywhere at once. Mary grabbed my arm as I reached for the door handle. "You can't go out there. Not during a summoning." "A what?" "They're calling him home. If you interfere, they'll take you too." Through the window, I watched Carl dance with streams of light that moved around him like living things. The aurora beams were definitely responding to his movements, reaching toward him when he raised his hands, spinning when he spun. Then Tommy screamed. I turned to see what was wrong and saw him pointing at the wall behind me. Aurora light was seeping through the wood, flowing into our station like luminous liquid. Where it touched our equipment, the metal began to glow. "The walls won't stop them," Mary said, her voice barely a whisper. "Nothing stops them when they want someone." The light kept pouring in through the walls, and with it came the singing, not from outside anymore, but from the light itself. I could hear individual voices now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. And slowly, I began to understand what they were singing about. They were singing about home. The aurora light filled our station like water, but it didn't behave like any physical substance I knew. It flowed around our furniture and equipment but passed right through Mary and Tommy. When it touched me, though, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Carl had been outside for 20 minutes, and the dancing lights seemed to be getting more excited. Through the window, I could see him moving in complex patterns, his arms weaving shapes in the air. The aurora responded to every gesture, creating spirals and waves of light that followed his movements perfectly. "He's teaching them," Tommy said quietly. "Teaching them what?" I asked. Mary answered. "Human movement. Human thoughts. They learn from us before they take us." I tried to process what she was saying scientifically. If these were some kind of unknown energy beings, it was possible they could interact with human bioelectrical fields. Maybe they were drawn to our neural activity, our consciousness. But that still didn't explain how they were getting through our walls, or why my electromagnetic instruments were registering impossible readings. Then the singing changed. Instead of the harmonized melody we'd been hearing, individual voices began speaking in English. Clear, human words coming from the aurora light itself. "Elizabeth," one voice called. "Dr. Elizabeth Nightfall." I spun around, looking for the source, but the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We know you," another voice said. 21 years watching our dances. You've seen us every night." "You're not real," I said out loud, feeling foolish for talking to lights. The aurora light suddenly coalesced into a shape tall, humanoid, but translucent and constantly shifting. It had the general form of a person, but its edges rippled like water. "Real," the figure said, and its voice was like wind chimes made of ice. "You measure electromagnetic fields. You study particle interactions. Are we not electromagnetic? Are we not particles?" The thing was right. From a purely scientific perspective, consciousness itself was just electrical activity in neural tissue. If these beings were some form of organized electromagnetic energy, they could theoretically be as real as human thought. "What do you want?" I asked. "To dance," it replied, "forever. In the space between sky and star, where there is no cold, no hunger, no loneliness, we offer you the same gift we offered your colleague." Through the window, I could see Carl still moving with the lights. But now I noticed something wrong with his movements. They were too fluid, too perfect. Human joints don't bend the way his arms and legs were bending. "Carl!" I shouted, banging on the window. He turned toward me, and I saw his face clearly for the first time since he'd gone outside. His skin had a luminescent quality, and his eyes glowed with the same green light as the aurora. When he smiled, it wasn't Carl's smile anymore. It was too wide, too knowing. "He's happy," the light being said. "He understands now. Physical form is limitation. Consciousness can be so much more." Mary grabbed my arm again. "Don't listen. They make it sound wonderful, but look at his body." I looked more carefully at Carl's dancing form. His movements were beautiful, but his body looked wrong, thinner somehow, less solid. As I watched, his outline began to blur at the edges, like he was dissolving into the aurora light. "You're killing him," I said. "Killing?" The being's voice carried what might have been confusion. "We are freeing his consciousness from decay, from aging, from death. He will dance with us until the stars burn out. But his body is temporary, unnecessary. You know this. You study electromagnetic phenomena. Consciousness is electrical pattern. We preserve the pattern forever." More light beings began forming in the station. They had different heights and shapes, but all shared that same translucent, shifting quality. Some appeared more human than others, as if they'd retained more of their original forms. "How many of you used to be human?" I asked. "Many?" One of them replied in a voice that sounded like singing ice. "The weather station researchers from 1943. Arctic explorers from 1897. Inuit hunters from centuries past. All who looked too long at our dances and heard our call." Tommy whimpered behind me. These beings were talking about centuries of disappearances, people who'd vanished in the Arctic and never been found. "We don't force," another being said. "We invite. But once the invitation is accepted, the dance never ends." Through the window, Carl's body was becoming more transparent by the minute. I could see the aurora light flowing through him now, replacing his physical substance with something that looked like liquid starlight. "Elizabeth," his voice called, but it wasn't coming from his mouth anymore. It was coming from the lights themselves. "You should see this. It's incredible. I can feel the solar wind, taste the magnetic field. I can see the whole universe spread out like a map." The light being nearest to me extended what might have been a hand. "Touch us, and you will understand. Your consciousness will expand beyond the limitations of flesh." I almost reached for it. The scientific part of my mind was fascinated by the possibility of experiencing electromagnetic phenomena directly. But Mary's hand on my shoulder stopped me. "My grandmother said the spirits showed her wonders too," Mary whispered. "Beautiful visions of dancing among the stars." But she remembered the songs her mother taught her, and they kept her feet on the ground. Mary began humming under her breath, a low, rhythmic melody that sounded ancient. The light beings immediately began backing away from her. "Older songs," one of them said, and for the first time, their voice carried something that might have been fear. "Protection songs. Binding songs." Mary's humming grew louder, and Tommy joined in. Their voices created a harmony that seemed to push against the aurora light, forcing it back toward the walls. "Sing with us," Mary urged me. "The melody isn't hard," but I couldn't focus on singing. Through the window, Carl's transformation was accelerating. His body was now more light than flesh, and as I watched in horror, his physical form began to dissolve completely. "Carl!" I screamed. His voice answered from the aurora itself. "I'm not gone, Elizabeth. I'm everywhere. Join us. Let us show you the dance that never ends." The light beings pressed closer despite Mary's singing. "Choose quickly," they said in unison. "Your colleague's consciousness is nearly integrated. Soon we must return to the sky realm. This is your only chance to join the eternal dance." Outside, the last traces of Carl's physical body faded into streams of aurora light. My research partner of 8 years had just dissolved into electromagnetic energy, and something wearing his consciousness was inviting me to follow. I had to make a choice: trust science and reach for the impossible, or trust ancient songs and stay human. The aurora light reached toward me like luminous fingers, and Carl's voice whispered from everywhere at once. "Come home, Elizabeth. Come home to the lights." Mary's ancient melody filled the station, but I could feel the pull of the aurora growing stronger. The light beings pressed closer, their electromagnetic presence making my skin tingle with warmth despite the Arctic cold. "Elizabeth," Carl's voice called from the swirling lights, "don't you understand? This is what we've been studying our whole lives. We can become part of it. We can be the aurora." The scientific part of my mind was still working, even in terror. These beings were clearly more advanced than anything in our textbooks. They existed as pure consciousness within electromagnetic fields. They could manipulate matter at the molecular level, and they'd somehow preserved human awareness within their energy matrix. From a research perspective, it was the discovery of the millennium. From a human perspective, it was extinction. "The song," Mary said urgently, still humming. "You have to help us. 3 voices are stronger than 2. I tried to focus on her melody, but the aurora lights were showing me things, visions of floating among the stars, of seeing Earth from space, of understanding the universe's electromagnetic structure from the inside. It was beautiful and terrible and tempting. One of the light beings moved closer to Tommy. "Young consciousness adapts quickly," it said. "Your son would dance well among the stars." "Stay away from him." Mary's voice rose to a shout, and her humming became more aggressive, more commanding. The being backed away slightly. "Protection songs grow weaker each generation. Fewer humans remember the old bindings. Soon, all will be free to join us." I realized what was happening. These weren't just folk tales Mary's grandmother had passed down. They were actual protective techniques, developed by people who'd encountered these entities before. Ancient technology, in a way not electromagnetic, but acoustic, designed to interfere with the aurora being's influence. "What are the words?" I asked Mary quickly. "There are no words, just the feeling. Sing about being rooted. Sing about staying connected to the ground, to your body, to the people you love." I began to hum along with Mary and Tommy. The melody wasn't complex, but it required something deeper than just making sounds. I had to focus on my connection to physical reality, the feel of my boots on the floor, the cold air in my lungs, the warmth of being near other living humans. The aurora beings immediately moved away from me. "She learns the binding song," one said with what sounded like disappointment. Another consciousness closed to us. "Not closed," another replied, "protected." But protection fails when will weakens. They were right. I could feel the song working, creating a kind of barrier between my consciousness and their electromagnetic presence. But maintaining that focus was exhausting. Every time my attention wandered, I felt their pull growing stronger. Outside, Carl's voice had merged with the other singing lights. I could still pick out his tone among the chorus, but he was becoming part of something larger, his individual consciousness dissolving into their collective. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked the beings. "Since your species learned to look up at night sky," one replied. "We are old when your son was young. We danced here before your planet had ice." "But why take our consciousness?" "Because you are special. Other creatures have electrical patterns, simple, instinctive. But human consciousness is complex, creative. When we integrate human awareness, we learn new forms of beauty." I shuddered. They were talking about us like we were components to be harvested, interesting software to be absorbed into their system. "The weather station in 1943, I said. "What happened to those men's bodies?" "Preserved in stasis while consciousness danced. But after days without integration, bodies began to fail. We released them, but their awareness remained partially with us. They lived, but never fully returned." Mary's grandmother. The men sitting in the snow, staring at the sky with empty eyes. The aurora beings had tried to take them but hadn't completed the process, leaving them trapped between human and light being existence. "Carl is almost fully integrated," another being said. "Soon his body memories will fade completely. He will forget cold, forget hunger, forget the weight of flesh." Through the aurora light filling our station, I could see Carl's consciousness moving with alien grace. His thoughts had become visible as patterns of light, and they were beautiful in a way that hurt to watch. "Elizabeth," his voice called. and now it sounded like a choir singing in harmony. I can show you things you never dreamed of. The magnetic field has music. Solar radiation has flavors. Space itself has texture you can touch. I wanted to experience what he was describing. 21 years of studying electromagnetic phenomena, and here was a chance to become one with my life's work. But Mary's song kept me anchored to the memory of who I was. The Aurora beings began moving toward the walls. "Dawn comes," one said. "We must return to Sky Realm before sun rises." "Wait," I called out. "What happens to Carl during the day?" "He sleeps in the electromagnetic field above your world. Each night, he dances with us again. Each dawn, we rise higher until full integration is complete." They were going to take him permanently. In a few more nights, Carl would be gone forever, his consciousness absorbed into their collective entity. "Please," I said, "give him back." He chose freely. "We do not steal, we invite." The light beings began flowing back through the walls, taking Carl's consciousness with them. As the aurora light faded from our station, I heard his voice one last time. "Find me in the lights, Elizabeth, when you're ready to dance forever." Then silence. Mary stopped singing and sagged against the wall, exhausted. Tommy sat down hard on the floor, shaking. "Is it over?" Tommy asked. I looked out the window. The aurora had risen back into the sky, but I could still see patterns in the lights that moved differently from natural electromagnetic phenomena. Carl was up there somewhere, learning to exist as pure consciousness. "For tonight," I said, but I knew they'd be back. And each night, their invitation would be harder to resist. We left the station at first light. Mary and Tommy led me across 20 miles of tundra to where they'd cached an emergency sled and supplies. I wanted to bring our research data, but Mary insisted we take only what we needed to survive. "Knowledge of them is dangerous," she said. "The more you understand, the more they can call to you." It took us 3 days to reach the nearest village. During the travel, I noticed changes in myself that I didn't tell the others about. When I closed my eyes, I could see electromagnetic fields as faint patterns of light. At night, I felt a constant pull toward the north, where the aurora danced. The official investigation was a joke. Park Service administrators decided our research station had suffered catastrophic equipment failure due to extreme electromagnetic interference. Carl was listed as missing, presumed dead due to exposure. The fact that we'd found no body, no blood, and no signs of struggle didn't seem to bother anyone. I tried to tell them about the aurora beings, but my supervisor just recommended I take extended leave to recover from trauma. When I insisted on returning to continue research, they transferred me to a desk job in Anchorage. That was 46 years ago. I never went back to studying aurora phenomena officially, but I never stopped watching the lights. I learned to recognize the patterns that indicate when the beings are actively hunting. I developed an early warning system based on electromagnetic readings and traditional Inuit weather signs. Over the years, I've prevented 17 other researchers from disappearing into the aurora realm. Most of them thought I was crazy when I warned them about consciousness-stealing light beings. A few listened. The changes in my body became permanent. During strong aurora displays, my eyes glow with the same green light I saw in Carl's face. My reflection sometimes appears translucent in mirrors, as if part of me exists in both worlds. I can feel Carl sometimes, when the lights are particularly active. His consciousness touches mine across the electromagnetic spectrum, sharing glimpses of the cosmic perspective he's gained. He shows me solar storms from the inside, the music of planetary magnetic fields, the dance of particles at the edge of space. It's beautiful, terrifying, and tempting. Mary's grandmother died in 1987, but before she passed, she taught me more protection songs, melodies that bind consciousness to flesh, harmonies that keep the mind rooted in physical reality. I've passed these songs to other researchers, though few believe they're anything more than folk music. Tommy grew up to become a climatologist. He studies aurora activity from the safety of southern universities, but he calls me every winter to check that I'm still human. Smart kid. The aurora beings haven't given up on me. Every few years, during peak solar activity, they descend close to Earth again. I hear Carl's voice calling from the lights, inviting me to join their eternal dance. The invitation grows more appealing as I age, as my body begins to fail in ways that consciousness as electromagnetic energy never would. But I've learned something the beings don't seem to understand. Humanity isn't just consciousness. It's also choice. The choice to remain connected to other people, to physical reality, to the messy, painful, temporary experience of being alive in flesh and bone. Last week, a young graduate student called me about unusual aurora readings she detected near Fairbanks. Her voice carried the same excitement Carl used to have when discussing electromagnetic phenomena. I drove up to meet her yesterday. She's already hearing the singing. Tonight, I'm going to teach her Mary's grandmother's songs. I'm going to tell her about the weather station in 1943, about Carl's transformation, about the choice she'll have to make when the lights come down to dance. I'm going to give her the tools to stay human. Because someone has to keep watch. Someone has to remember that the aurora borealis isn't just beautiful natural phenomenon, it's also home to ancient beings who collect consciousness, like we collect specimens. And sometimes, on very clear nights when the solar wind is strong, those beings come down to Earth to invite humans home. Never believe in aurora spirits. I tell people who ask about my years in the Arctic. At least, not until they try to take you dancing. When I look in mirrors now, especially during aurora season, my reflection shows the faint glow of someone who's been marked by light, a reminder that I once stood at the edge of human experience and chose to step back. Carl's still up there, dancing among the stars. On nights when the aurora is particularly active, I swear I can hear him laughing in the electromagnetic static of my old radio. He sounds happy. But he's not human anymore, and that makes all the difference in the world. My name is Samuel Permafrost, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. Most folks think that's a funny last name for someone who works in Alaska, but my grandfather always said it meant we were built to last through anything winter could throw at us. He was Métis, like me, and he knew the old stories about things that lived in the ice. I wish I'd listened to him better. February 1981 was the coldest month I'd ever worked through. The thermometer outside my cabin in Yukon-Charlie Rivers National Preserve hadn't seen above -40 in 3 weeks. Out here, 400 miles from the nearest real town. Cold like that can kill you in minutes, if you're not careful. But the ice roads were perfect. That's what I did back then, maintained the winter highways that formed when the rivers froze thick enough to drive on. Every year, from January through March, these frozen waterways became lifelines for tiny villages scattered across the wilderness. Without the ice roads, places like Chalkitsik and Arctic Village would be completely cut off from the outside world. I used to drive truck before I became a ranger. 18-wheelers mostly, hauling freight across the lower 48. But something about Alaska called to me. Maybe it was my Métis blood. The part of me that understood how to read the land and respect what lived here. Or maybe I was just tired of traffic and people and wanted somewhere I could breathe. My partner was Maria Frostbite, yeah. That's really her name, and yes, we got teased about it constantly. Maria was the best mechanic in the territory and could fix anything with an engine. She'd been running supply convoys longer than I'd been alive, and there wasn't an ice road in Alaska she couldn't navigate blindfolded. "Sam," she said that morning, stomping the snow off her boots as she came into my cabin. "We got an emergency call from Chalkitsik, 3 kids down with pneumonia, and the village is out of antibiotics." I looked up from my coffee. "How bad?" "Bad. The youngest is only 4 years old. Doc says they might not make it through the weekend without medicine." The radio crackled on my desk. "Ranger Station. This is Convoy Dispatch." "You copy?" I picked up the handset. "This is Permafrost. Go ahead." "Sam? We're putting together an emergency supply run. Medical supplies, food, heating oil. You and Frostbite available to guide?" Maria was already pulling on her heavy coat. "Tell them we'll have the route checked and ready in 2 hours." I keyed the radio. "Affirmative. We'll take point and bring 3 trucks through." "Copy that." Drivers are Jake Tunderson, Mike Clearwater, and Bobby Snowdrift, all experienced winter haulers. I knew all 3 men. Good drivers who respected the ice and knew how to handle their rigs in impossible conditions. If we were going to make this run work, they were the right crew. "Weather's supposed to hold steady," Maria said, checking her charts. "Ice thickness is running 4 to 6 feet on the main channel, should be no problem for loaded trucks. But as I gathered my gear, ice augers, emergency beacons, survival kit, extra radio batteries, something felt wrong. Maybe it was the complete silence outside. No wind, no animal sounds, just the kind of dead quiet that makes your skin crawl. I'd driven this route dozens of times, but something was different about today. The air felt heavier somehow, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. My grandfather used to tell stories about the Aklut creatures from Inuit legend that could change from killer whales into wolves. They lived in the water during summer and hunted on land during winter, moving through ice like it was air. He said they protected the waterways from people who didn't show proper respect. Just stories, I muttered, shouldering my pack. But as we headed out to meet the convoy, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from beneath the ice. The trucks were already warming up when we reached the staging area. 3 massive semis, loaded with medical supplies, food, and heating oil, enough to keep Chalk Yitzhak going through the rest of winter. Each truck weighed about 40 tons fully loaded, right at the limit of what the ice could safely support. Jake Tunderson climbed down from the lead truck, his breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. "Morning, Sam." "Maria, hell of a day for a drive." "Could be worse," Maria said, though I could hear the concern in her voice. "At least the weather's holding." I walked over to check the ice thickness one more time. Standard procedure called for at least 3 feet of solid ice to support a loaded truck, and we had double that. The auger bit through cleanly, bringing up clear blue ice, the strongest kind. "Looking good," I called back. "Let's get moving." We climbed into my modified pickup, specially equipped with oversized tires and emergency gear. Maria took the passenger seat while I grabbed the CB radio. "Convoy leader to all units. Radio check, over. Tunderson here. Copy. Clear. Clearwater. Copy. Snowdrift. Loud and clear. All right, gentlemen. Standard spacing, maintain 200 yards between vehicles. If anyone starts feeling soft ice, call it immediately. No heroes today. These kids need what we're carrying." Hauf. The first 20 miles went smooth. The ice road stretched out ahead of us like a white highway, marked with reflective poles every 100 yards. On both sides, the wilderness stretched endlessly, rolling hills covered in spruce and birch, their branches heavy with snow. But around mile 25, I started noticing things. "Maria, you see those holes in the ice?" She leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Yeah. What do you think made them?" The holes were perfect circles, about 6 feet across, scattered along both sides of the road. The edges were smooth as glass, like someone had used a giant cookie cutter. But what bothered me most was that they went straight down, no slanting sides like you'd expect from animals breaking through. "Never seen anything like that," I said. "Too big for seals, wrong shape for bears." The CB crackled. "Convoy leader, this is Tunderson. You seeing these holes?" "Copy. Keep your distance and maintain speed." "Roger. But Sam, I got a weird reading on my ice thermometer. Says the ice is different temperatures in different spots. That normal?" I frowned. "Ice temperature should be consistent across the whole road surface." "Clarify different, Jake." "Well, most of it's reading normal, cold as hell, but there's patches that are showing almost freezing, right next to areas that are colder than my truck's refrigeration unit." Maria and I exchanged looks. That wasn't possible. Ice formed uniformly under these conditions. "Probably just instrument malfunction," I radioed back. "Keep monitoring and let me know if it gets worse." But over the next 10 miles, the weird readings multiplied. Clearwater reported his CB radio picking up strange interference sounds like whale songs mixed with static. Snowdrift said his engine temperature was running hot despite the -40 air. Then we found the first truck. It was about 50 yards off the main route, sitting at an angle with its front end disappeared into a hole in the ice. The cab looked intact, but there was no sign of the driver. "That's impossible," Maria whispered. "There's no record of any trucks using this route in the past month." I pulled over and grabbed my emergency kit. "Jake, hold position. We're going to investigate." The truck was a 1972 Kenworth, painted in faded blue and white. As we got closer, I could see massive gouges in the metal chassis, like something with claws the size of baseball bats had tried to open it like a can. But what really got my attention was the registration. The truck was from a convoy that had disappeared in 1928, 53 years ago. "Sam," Maria called from the other side of the wreck. "Look at this." The ice around the truck was carved with symbols I didn't recognize, swirling patterns that looked almost like writing. But what made my blood freeze was the tracks leading away from the wreck. They started as wolf paws, each one 18 inches long. But as they moved toward the water, they gradually changed. The claws became more like flippers. The pad marks grew wider and rounder. By the time they reached the edge of the ice, they looked exactly like the prints a killer whale might make if it could somehow walk on land. The CB squawked. "Convoy leader, this is Clearwater. I got movement under the ice, big shadows, keeping pace with us." I jogged back to my truck, Maria right behind me. "Define movement, Mike." "Dark shapes, maybe 20 feet long, swimming parallel to the road, about 50 feet out. There's a whole bunch of them. Probably just fish," I said. But my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. Fish didn't grow 20 feet long in these waters. And they certainly didn't swim in formation like military units. That's when Snowdrift screamed over the radio. "Something hit my truck. Jesus Christ, something huge just hit me from underneath." I gunned the engine, racing toward Snowdrift's position. Through the CB static, I could hear him shouting about impacts that felt like sledgehammers, coming from directly below his trailer. When we reached him, his truck was still moving, but I could see spiderweb cracks spreading across the ice in his tire tracks. "Bobby, shut her down," I yelled into the radio. "Stop the truck now." But it was too late. The ice gave way with a sound like thunder, and Snowdrift's entire rig disappeared into black water in less than 10 seconds. The last thing we heard over the radio was Bobby screaming about something with teeth grabbing his cab from underneath. "Back up! Everyone back up now!" I shouted into the CB, but Jake and Mike were already reversing their trucks away from the spreading cracks. The hole where Snowdrift had gone through was enormous, at least 50 feet across, and the water was so dark it looked like black paint. No sign of the truck, the trailer, or Bobby. "Jesus, Sam," Jake's voice was shaking over the radio. "What the hell happened? Ice doesn't just give way like that." I grabbed my ice thickness tester and ran to the edge of the hole. The reading made no sense. The ice around the break was still 4 feet thick, plenty strong enough to support a truck. It was like something had punched through from underneath, with enough force to shatter solid ice like glass. "Maria, get on the emergency beacon. We need search and rescue." She was already working the radio, but all we got was static, mixed with sounds that made my skin crawl deep, clicking noises and high-pitched whistles that sounded almost like whale songs. "Sam," Mike called over the CB. "I'm seeing more holes opening up, fresh ones. They're appearing in a line heading straight for us." I looked where he was pointing. Perfect circular holes were appearing in the ice every few seconds, each one exactly the same size as the ones we'd seen earlier. They formed a pattern like something was swimming beneath the surface and testing the ice for weak spots. But the worst part was how they seemed to be learning. Each hole appeared faster than the last, and they were getting closer to the main road. "We need to move," I said. "Now, both trucks, follow my exact tire tracks. Don't deviate by an inch." As we started forward again, I caught sight of something that made my blood freeze. In the black water of Snowdrift's hole, something white and massive was moving. It looked like the back of a whale, but whales didn't have fur, and they definitely didn't have pointed ears. "You see that?" Maria whispered. Before I could answer, the thing in the water rolled over. For just a second, I saw an eye the size of a dinner plate, intelligent and angry, staring right at us. Then it disappeared back into the depths. The next 15 miles were a nightmare. More holes kept appearing, always in places that should have been safe. Our radios filled with whale songs and wolf howls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Both remaining trucks reported engine problems, despite the freezing temperature. But the worst was what Jake saw in his mirrors. "Convoy leader," his voice was barely a whisper. "I got something following us, running on the ice behind my trailer." "What kind of something?" "Wolves, but they're huge, Sam, big as horses, and they're running underneath the ice somehow. I can see them through the surface." I checked my mirrors but saw nothing except the white expanse of the ice road. "Jake, wolves can't run under ice, it's solid frozen." "I know what I'm seeing. There's 5 of them, maybe 6. They're keeping perfect pace with us, and they're running like the ice is water." Maria was checking her gauges. "Sam, our engine temperature just spiked. We're running hot." That was impossible. In -40 air, engines ran cold no matter what. I looked at the temperature gauge and saw she was right. We were almost in the red zone. Then I heard it, a sound that turned my bones to ice. From somewhere behind us came a long, mournful call that was part wolf howl and part whale song. It was answered by another call from our left, then another from our right. We were being surrounded by things that shouldn't exist. "Floor it," I told Maria. "We need to reach the village before." My words were cut off by an impact that lifted the rear of our truck 2 feet off the ice. Something had hit us from below with tremendous force. "They're testing us," Maria said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Whatever they are, they're testing how strong we are." The CB exploded with panicked voices. Mike was shouting about massive shapes breaching the surface around his truck. Jake was screaming about something with teeth the size of railroad spikes that had grabbed onto his trailer. That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. They rose through the ice like it was water, 5 creatures that looked like wolves crossed with killer whales. Each one was over 15 feet long, with black and white fur that seemed to shift and flow like they were underwater, even in open air. Their heads were wolf-shaped but enormous, with jaws that could bite a man in half. But their eyes were the worst part. They held intelligence. These weren't animals, they were something else entirely. Something that thought and planned and hunted with purpose. The largest one, obviously the leader, surfaced directly in front of our convoy. It studied us for a long moment, then opened its jaws and let out a call that made the ice under our wheels vibrate. It was calling to the others. And they were answering. As the pack surrounded us, I finally understood what my grandfather had tried to tell me. The Aklut weren't just legends. They were real, they were territorial, and we had just violated their hunting grounds during the one season when they were at their strongest. The ice beneath us started to crack. The Alpha Aklut was massive, bigger than any whale I'd ever seen, with the head of a wolf and eyes that burned with ancient intelligence. It didn't move like an animal. It moved like something that had been hunting these waters for centuries, and knew every trick of ice and current. "Sam," Maria's voice was steady despite everything. "My grandfather told stories about these things. Aklut. They're not just animals, they're guardians, protectors of the waterways." The creature tilted its massive head, studying our convoy with those intelligent eyes. Around us, the other pack members had taken positions in a perfect hunting formation. They weren't attacking randomly, this was coordinated, planned. Guardians of what? I managed to ask. The balance between land and water. The old stories say they appear when humans take too much, or disrespect the ice spirits. I thought about all the convoy runs we'd made, all the heavy trucks crossing these frozen rivers, commercial shipping, supply runs, tourist expeditions. Over the years, the ice roads had gone from emergency routes to regular highways. The Alpha made a sound part whale song, part wolf howl, and suddenly I understood. It was trying to communicate. "Jake, Mike," I called on the radio. "Cut your engines, right now." "Are you crazy?" Jake's voice cracked. "These things will tear us apart." "Do it. They're trying to tell us something." One by one, the truck engines went quiet. In the sudden silence, the Alpha's vocalizations became clearer. It was a complex series of sounds, clicks, whistles, and deep rumbles that seemed to vibrate through the ice itself. But beneath those sounds, I heard something that made my heart stop. Human voices. Bobby Snowdrift was calling for help, but his voice was coming from underneath the ice, mixed with the whale songs. "They've got Bobby," I whispered, "but he's still alive." The Alpha heard me and responded with a series of sharp clicks. Then, impossibly, the ice began to change. Right in front of our trucks, the frozen surface became transparent as glass. 50 feet below, I could see Snowdrift's truck sitting intact on the river bottom. And inside the cab, Bobby was alive but changing. His skin had a blue-gray tint, and when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of something that belonged underwater. Gill slits had appeared along his neck. "The transformation," Maria breathed. "The stories say when Aklut claim someone, they don't kill them, they change them." The Alpha's eyes fixed on me, and I felt a pressure in my head like diving too deep, too fast. Images flooded my mind, memories that weren't mine. I saw these waterways as they had been decades ago, clean and untouched. I saw the first trucks crossing the ice, then more and more each year. Heavy vehicles leaking oil and exhaust, disturbing the delicate underwater ecosystem. I saw the pack trying to adapt, their hunting grounds disrupted by the constant rumble of engines overhead, their traditional migration routes blocked by regular truck traffic. And I understood, we weren't just using their territory, we were destroying it. They want us to leave, I said. Not just today. Forever. The Alpha nodded once, a gesture so human it was terrifying. Then it opened its massive jaws and sang a song that seemed to come from the deepest parts of the ocean. The ice responded. Cracks spread out from where the creatures stood, not random breaks, but deliberate patterns. They were showing us exactly how much control they had over their domain. But then Maria did something that probably saved our lives. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small carved figure, a killer whale made from walrus ivory. My grandmother's water offering, she said, holding it up so the Alpha could see. She taught me to always carry this when crossing the ice. The Alpha's expression changed. The rage in its eyes softened to something like respect. Maria opened her door and stepped out onto the ice. I wanted to stop her, but something told me this was important. She walked slowly toward the Alpha, holding the carved whale in both hands. When she was close enough to touch the creature's massive snout, she knelt and placed the offering on the ice. The Alpha studied the carving, then looked back at Maria. It sang a single, soft note. One by one, the other pack members began to sink back into the ice. The cracks stopped spreading. The whale songs faded to whispers. But the Alpha wasn't done with us yet. It turned those ancient eyes on me and sang again a different song, complex and layered with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. Then it touched its snout to my chest. Pain exploded through my body like lightning. I felt my ribs crack and reform, felt my lungs burn and change. The world went black for a moment, and when I opened my eyes again, everything looked different. The ice was no longer opaque. I could see through it as clearly as water, down to the river bottom, where strange plants swayed in the current and fish I'd never seen before swam in schools of silver light, and I could breathe. Not just air, water too. My lungs had changed, adapted. The Alpha had marked me, but it had also given me a gift, a responsibility. The great creature sank back into the ice, but before it disappeared completely, it sang one last song. This time, I understood every note. Remember, it was saying, remember and respect, or we will return. The official report listed the incident as catastrophic ice road failure due to unusual current patterns and climate fluctuation. Bobby Snowdrift was declared missing and presumed drowned when his truck broke through unstable ice. Maria and I never told anyone about the Aklut. The Yukon-Charlie River's winter route was permanently closed after that day. The Department of Transportation blamed global warming effects on ice stability, and no one questioned it too hard. After all, who would believe the truth? But I changed after that encounter. The marks the Alpha left on my chest never faded, 4 parallel scars that looked exactly like gill slits. And I discovered I could do things no human should be able to do. I could sense ice thickness just by touching it with my bare hand. I could hold my breath underwater for almost an hour. Most disturbing of all, sometimes when I looked in the mirror, my reflection showed features that weren't quite human: 2 large eyes, skin with a faintly blue tint, teeth that looked designed for tearing fish. Maria noticed the changes, but never commented on them directly. Instead, she started bringing me old maps and stories from her grandmother, traditional routes that the indigenous peoples had used for centuries, paths that showed proper respect for the spirits of the water. I became an unofficial consultant for winter road planning, always pushing for routes that avoided the most sacred waterways. I made up scientific reasons about ice density and current patterns, but the real reason was simpler. I could feel when we were getting too close to Aklut territory. The scars on my chest would burn like ice whenever I approached areas under their protection. Over the years, I connected with other park rangers, guides, and outdoorsmen who had encountered things that couldn't be explained. We formed a loose network of watchers, people who understood that Alaska's wilderness was protected by guardians older than human civilization. Some had been marked by thunderbirds, others carried scars from encounters with Bigfoot clans or Wendigo. We all served the same purpose, keeping the modern world from pushing too hard into places it didn't belong. Every winter, during ice road season, I patrol the waterways of the Yukon-Charlie Preserve. Officially, I'm checking ice thickness and weather conditions. Unofficially, I'm watching for signs that the balance is shifting again. because the Akhlut are still down there. Sometimes I can see them through the ice, swimming in the deep channels where the water never freezes. They watch the roads we build and the trucks that cross their territory, counting and measuring and deciding whether we've learned respect or if another lesson is needed. Last month, a commercial shipping company applied for permits to run heavy freight convoys through the old winter routes. They want to reopen the roads we closed, push bigger trucks through more often, turn the sacred waterways into industrial highways. I filed my opposition report yesterday, citing environmental concerns and ice instability. But if that doesn't work, if profit wins over wisdom like it usually does, I'll have to make other arrangements. Maria still has her grandmother's ivory carvings. I still carry my water offerings. And somewhere beneath the ice, the Alpha Akhlut still remembers the promise we made. Respect the ice, and it will support you. Violate its trust, and it will open beneath your feet like the jaws of a whale. I tell people that story whenever they ask about the scars on my chest, about why I oppose certain development projects, about why I sometimes stare at frozen rivers with an expression that makes them uncomfortable. Most don them think I'm just another old ranger with too many winters in the wilderness. They humor me and my superstitions about respecting traditional native wisdom. But every year, a few listen. They change their routes, cancel their projects, choose smaller trucks or different seasons. They remember that the ice remembers every footstep, and in the deep channels beneath the frozen surface, ancient guardians continue their patient watch, waiting to see if humanity has finally learned the lessons of the ice road killers. The balance holds, for now, but I've seen what happens when it tips. And I know the Akhlut are still hungry.